Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Exploring the Parsha Christmas Day Off edition. We are not doing this class in our usual format. It's November 22nd for us, and hopefully the past 3 days have been very exciting for you. We don't know what has unfolded. Rabbi Schatz, what do you think has unfolded between now and 3 days from now?
We come to you from the past.
Come to you from the past. We come in peace. Maybe aliens.
All right.
2020. Anything could have happened. All right. So we are joined not with our usual coterie of students, sadly. We wish you all well. But we do have the privilege of not one, but two, three.
Oh, Alex is in the car with John.
Oh, three. I'm like one, but wait, Alex, are you rocking this with us?
Yes.
Oh, I was saying not one, but three. Oh, not one, not two, but three. We're doing great. It's 2020 and I've forgotten how to count. We have three different Ziegler students joining us for this very special extra Zieglery edition of Exploring the Parsha. We have Josh and we have Alex and we have Ben. Great to have you guys here with us. We are in Parasha Vayigash. We are going to be exploring, we're indulging ourselves outside of our usual 2 or 3 psukim. We're going to be looking at 4 psukim, which is a whole lot of Torah to be working with, but we'll no doubt make it through, hopefully.
To be fair to the Ziegler students, I only told them that you were doing 2 through 4 because that's originally what we had decided. But we're doing 1 through 4. So
bonus pasuk.
Hopefully that won't throw you off. I gave them a little bit of extra time because usually rabbinical students like to do their own, prep and looking into things. So I gave them a little prep material. Just like you, the rabbinical student, Rabbi Shapiro.
I mean.
All right. Anyway.
Okay, so we're going to pick things up at the beginning of chapter 46. In some ways, the context is very easy here. We, as folks know, we've been moving through the story of Joseph with lots of back and forth with Joseph and the brothers and so on. But this is at kind of an inflection point where there's a very clear delineation between what has been before and what will come after. At the beginning of chapter 46, at this point, there has been a reunion between Joseph and his brothers after all of the shenanigans and tomfoolery, as the biblical Hebrew would have it, in terms of the brothers going back and forth, and Shimon stays back, and they have to bring Benjamin, and Judah tearfully begs Joseph to, in the style of Calypso, oh no, not he, how you can accuse him is a mystery, and so on and so forth. Joseph reveals himself, and the brothers, though a little bit freaked out, are glad to see him. Joseph sends them back to their father to come and reunite with him. And so he is about to do. So there's been this beautiful reunion. The brothers come back at the end of chapter 45. Right? The brothers tell him in verse 26, Joseph is still alive. He's ruling in Egypt. And Jacob has this initial moment where he doesn't even believe them, right? And understandably so. It's been a while. We were talking, Rabbi Schatz, you and I were talking a little bit last week. Does Jacob, right, think the brothers had something to do with Joseph's disappearance? And that Reuven knows he might not be dead, but whatever might have happened, now that he's confronted with this knowledge, we're told, lo ha'amin lahem, that he doesn't believe them. But then the brothers lay it all out in terms of what Joseph said, and he sort of gradually takes it all in. And Vatechi ruach Yaakov avihem, that Jacob's spirit was revived. Picks up a different piece we were talking about last week, potentially, but now the spirit of Yaakov, when we were going back and forth about the different names of Yaakov and Yisrael, now the ruach of Yaakov is back. He is revived, and he says, all right, let's go. Vayomer Yisrael, Rav od Yosef b'nichai, Joseph's still alive. We're going to go now. So that brings us to chapter 46. Like we said, we're going to look at these first 4 psukim. Rabbi Schatz picked these verses for a specific reason, and may or may not have found much to share on that specific reason, but I found some good stuff, and I think she did too. And no doubt our diligent rabbinical students found ample opportunity for exploration.
They were told there was no homework, but I'm sure they'll come up with things that are...
Oh, those rabbinical students. They're always good for lots of good stuff.
And
That's what they say.
As the rabbis say. Okay, so chapter 46. Vayisa Yisrael v'chol asher lo vayavo be'era shava. Yisrael sent out with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba. Vayizbach zvachim le'elohei aviv Yitzchak. And he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. This, I will say, was the clause that caught my eye, which is why I went back to Rabbi Schatz and said, oh, this verse looks interesting to me too. Somehow did not communicate that to our trusty rabbinical students. But it's interesting to me that it specifically says to the God of his father Isaac. And I found some interesting stuff on that. Verse 2, Vayomer Elohim l'Yisrael, God said to Israel, B'marat halayla, in a night vision, in a vision by night, Vayomer Yaakov, Yaakov, Vayomer Hineni. He said, Yaakov, Yaakov. Yaakov responded, Hineni, here I am. Always an evocative 1-2 punch there in terms of the dialogue, the repetition of the name and the Hineni. Vayomer Anochi Ha'el Elohei Avicha. I am God. I am the God of your father. Al Tira Merda Mitzrayma, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. Ki lagoy gadol asimcha sham, for I will make you there a great nation. Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayma, I will go down with you to Egypt. If I was translating literally, I might say, I will go down with you to Egypt.
Egypt word. That's what Zioni Zevit would tell you to say. Egypt word, towards Egypt. Anyway, continue.
Thank you, Dr. Zevit. So nice to have you on the call with us as well. Your voice is a bit. But yes, Egypt word, but I'm also picking... What?
Sorry, it's good to know that the trauma doesn't go away even years later. Still.
No, his teaching will stay with you wherever you go, especially that stuff with the hay. Anyway, we're now on a tangent. But
there's a different piece I saw in terms of why it's a hay that Dr. Zevit would probably say is rubbish, but that's okay. But I was pointing out the Anochi and Ered, right? You don't need to say I when the I is implicit in the Ered. So that's a thing. Anochi Ered imcha Mitzrayma va'anochi alcha gam alo. And Yes, I will take you up out of there. V'Yosef yashet yado al enecha, and Yosef's hand will close your eyes. So there's a lot in there. Rabbi Schatz, I don't know if you want to speak to the piece that initially caught your eye about those verses, and we can go from there.
Let's just go.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, let's just go to the verses and see if there are any kushiyot, because if there are not, then I can just jump right into the piece that, let me share the verses. Hold on. So here are I have commentaries interspersed. Can you, Rabbi Shapiro, can you? No, yours is on paper. We're doing great.
I can share. I have the verses up. I can do it.
Okay, great. Okay.
Except it says host disabled participant screen share.
Sorry.
There's your obligatory Zoom.
Go ahead.
Snafu. Verses.
Okay, so what we typically do is see if there are any kushiot, any questions that you have about these verses. It could be about a word. It could be about just a general kind of understanding of what's going on. Anything that if you could scroll up a little bit, just so we can see 4 also. Sorry, down. Yeah. Okay. Just to hear if there are any things that you are thinking about or anything that caught your eye. And no pressure, but if there is anything, we would love to hear it.
No pressure, but it better be a good question.
Well, with the lack of pressure duly noted, the 2 things that stood out to me are both name-based. Mm-hmm. So we have this back and forth. I guess I'll start in the first verse. I don't traditionally associate Beersheba with Yitzchak. I know he's been there and whatnot, but to me, that's like Abraham's territory. So why are we talking about Yitzchak here?
Yeah.
And then the second one that really pops out to me is in the next pasuk. It's the narrative mentions the name Yisrael, but God is calling to Yaakov, and it's in the same verse. Like that seems really off to me. Very interesting. I don't know. But those were the 2 things that immediately popped out to me.
Great. Yeah. The commentators are going to talk about why invoke Isaac at all, but not necessarily the Beersheba piece. I think that's a very interesting catch, or at least I didn't see that. Maybe Rabbi Shapiro did, but I didn't see that they talked about Isaac in relationship to Beersheba. I just thought they talked about Isaac and why say Elohei Aviv Yitzchak. And then, Josh Jacobs is also joining our call. We're going to have 2 Josh Jacobses here.
I believe it's Josh's Jacobs.
Josh's Jacobs. Okay. And then the second piece, I also I love the idea of when Israel is used and when Yaakov is used. And the commentators pick up on this as well, of why use both in the same phrase when we're clearly talking to the same person. And seemingly what's even more important is seemingly talking to the same person kind of in the same kind of experience. So it's not just that they're talking to Jacob and it's this type of experience, but no, now we're going to have an experience and call him Israel. It seems to be the same experience calling him both. So we're going to definitely look at that. Great. You picked up what the rabbis put down, as they say.
You pass.
Alex or Josh, any kushiot? You don't have to have any. Just want to not gloss over you if you do have them.
Thank you. No, I mean, the repetition is obviously a question, just given that whenever if nothing is superfluous in Torah, then why Yaakov twice?
Yeah, great.
And then Hineni, which, as you mentioned, is such a loaded term, makes you think of the Akedah, makes you think of, so what's the invocation there?
Yeah.
I have a whole thing. I have a theory of Hineni throughout the Yaakov narrative.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if it's a theory, but I was like, I went back and tracked it a little bit, and it's interesting to see where it pops up.
Yeah, I'd be really interested about that. And then more of just an observation, less a question, but it is pretty nice, this relationship that's painted where God is comforting Jacob and saying, "Don't worry." And here, you've been in pain for so long. Because I know some people have asked, why would God put Jacob through such pain of feeling that his favorite son Joseph is dead for so long and all of this torture. So it's nice here, this God of comfort saying, "Don't worry," and he's going to close your eyes. It's all going to work out.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I think there's one really beautiful piece that I brought that talks about what does it mean to close his eyes. Because when we think about, for those of us who watch crime shows, when we think about like coming upon a dead body, calm down, Rabbi Shapiro, coming upon a dead body and then they close the dead person's eyes, like that to me, when I read this, that's what I thought of, but actually that's not what the Torah, at least according to the rabbis, not what the Torah was implying. Rabbi Shapiro is making so many faces, and I don't know how to read any of them, but...
No, I'm treasuring the ability that I can make faces without anybody on the podcast knowing that I'm making faces.
Oh, okay.
You're outing me here.
I won't mention that you're making faces. But I do think that that's something that has been... It is much more a Christian custom that when you're in the presence of a dead body, that the eyes must be closed, than one that I've actually seen in Jewish tradition. But it's possible that it comes from here, from this moment of how we interpret that moment, and the other religions who are reading this text interpret that moment. Alex, anything before I move on? You don't have to. I just don't want to.
Yeah, I'm just catching up, and I don't want to repeat what's already been said. And I guess for me that it seems that God always appears. I don't know if this has been said, but that God always appears to Jacob in these visions at night.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yay for Alex. Okay.
Apparently, Alex really passes.
Yeah.
That was it's like from Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse. Like that was the word of the day.
I was starting to think that I might be a crazy person for thinking about this more heavily.
Crazy person for shrieking on a podcast.
Yeah, I was her direct intern for a year, and never was I validated with that kind of reaction once.
That is not true. Okay, so the idea that Jacob has these dreams, or at least has moments of connection to God at night, or in moments where we wouldn't expect God to actually have influence or relationship, right? We often come across God with other characters in moments where they're very present, as opposed to Jacob, who is less than present in all of the moments that he comes across God. So I was just excited that someone else thought of that. The other thing that I came across that was interesting, and I hadn't thought about this until I actually was coming across the commentaries. Rabbi Shapiro, will you go? Can I see verse 1? Can you go up a little bit?
Tell me verse 1.
That there's something very special about how God is partnering with Jacob throughout this whole experience, right? He goes up, he goes down, he stays with him, all these different moments of connection. And we see them actually in these verses in 4 different ways. First is through his father, and then is really through kind of his subconscious almost, and then really partnership, like in a parallel sense, right? Being with him, next to him as he's going about these moments. So that was the other thing that I came across. Any kushiyot on your end, Rabbi Shapiro?
It's interesting that you see it that way. I found a lovely piece about God walking with Jacob through this. So I'm good. No, we have 2. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what's been named to this point, for sure. I noticed the word Anochi appearing. Like, I noticed some of that, and I found a piece on that. I always like the Hinaneying. Ben, I also noted. Can I, if I'm not kushioting, can I pick up what Ben was noticing about Beersheba?
Yeah, sure.
Is that allowed?
Yeah. Mother,
may I?
This is a podcast. We do this class together. You can do whatever you want.
I also noticed the Beersheba piece, and it's interesting that you made the comment that you see it as like a Abraham place and not necessarily a Yitzchak place, because that pinged for me as well. But then I went back and I was looking at it, and it is also a Yitzchak place, right? It's also a Yitzchak place. Going back, if you look in chapter 26, after the whole back and forth that Yitzchak has with Avimelech, right? Who probably isn't the first Avimelech, but we don't know. But it's probably right. It's probably like Avimelech the second, right, or whatever it is, who's in that area. It actually turns out that Isaac's servants find a well, and they call it Shiva, and now today it's called Beersheba, right? So that's in chapter 26. So it's like it's both in Abraham and a Yitzchak place, right? Which is particularly interesting, given that like now this is the place where Yaakov is before he leaves the land, right? And there were a few different commentaries I saw that made the point, and I actually found a particularly interesting one. What Radak says. Oh no, this was the Kedushat Levi actually, but a few different commentators pick up on the point that he's invoking Yitzchak's name when Yitzchak specifically was the only one of the Avot who didn't leave the land. So there's an interesting piece about he's in this place where his grandfather was, but specifically his father was, and his father was the one who never left. The Kedushat Levi goes so far as to say that the reason that he made those sacrifices there is because he was actually hoping that God would change God's mind so he wouldn't have to leave the land, right? That there's this moment where he's pausing and he's saying, do I really need to go, right? Like, can't you bring Joseph here instead of me needing to go there? And I think there's a few different interesting pieces about calling Yitzchak's name specifically, but that conjunction then, like you pointed out, of Beersheba specifically, and that moment of pause before he leaves. It's just an interesting layering there in terms of how Yitzchak functioned in the narrative now, what he's doing, and that specific place. So I found that to be an interesting comment.
Rabbi Shapiro, why don't you start us off with, since you focused in on the first verse and I focused mostly on the second and the fourth verse. So do you want to start off and then I'll add, we can kind of just go in chronological order?
Well, I thought I started. Didn't that kind of start?
No, yes, but I'm just saying, like, do you want to add to that piece before we move off of the first pasuk? Is all I'm saying, or is that all you had on the first pasuk?
I mean, I thought that was interesting.
Okay, I'm gonna go because
no further comment, Your Honor.
Okay, so I'll share my screen actually so that you can see the text that I brought, because often I think that's an easier way of seeing the connections. Okay, so as Alex pointed out, and as you heard me very excited about, there is this idea that he is again having this connection with God at night. However, as Josh mentioned, the commentators, and this is why I told Rabbi Shapiro that the commentators weren't talking about what I wanted them to talk about, because they're mostly focused on this Yaakov piece. And I've always loved the differences between when Yaakov is used and when Israel is used, and so I especially appreciate this verse that has both, for all the reasons that I mentioned before. And so Ramban says, even though Yisrael, as his name, has been used many times, God calls him here Yaakov to actually show a certain kind of character that is going to be coming out of this moment, right? That he's going into exile, that it's more of like a not personal, but more of a like humanized moment that is coming after this, as opposed to a spiritual, relational with God moment, right? That they're going into slavery. It's going to be like really tachlis, right? Like back to the name that he was given originally, not the name that he was given by God, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure that I'm super compelled by the commentary, but I do think that it's an interesting way of distinguishing between Yisrael and Yaakov. So I wanted to share that with you. And then Radak says something different, but maybe more interesting. The reason this call to Yaakov is repeated is to illustrate that for how many years Yaakov had not been favored with communication from God. By repeating his name at this point, Yaakov was alerted to the fact that he would receive a prophetic insight. So it's actually not the opposite, but it kind of takes a different spin, that by saying Yaakov's name, that actually implies that God will be more part of Jacob's life upcoming and what's going to follow this moment. But that what Radak is picking up on is this recalling that God hasn't been as intertwined in Jacob's life day to day as he might have been in Abraham and in Isaac's life. And there's an interesting question in there about why, and why did God make that choice, and is God more available or involved in Yisrael's life but not Yaakov's life? It's a very interesting piece to kind of dissect and figure out what Radak is getting at here, but potentially kind of a sign for those reading Torah to know what's upcoming and using Yaakov's name twice. So the other piece, before we move into the dream part, that I saw from Midrash Tanchuma, it's actually a Midrash on Parshat Noach. There are many times, as you're going to see down here in a second, it says that Abraham's name was also said twice, same with Moshe, same with Shmuel, actually, that names are said twice in particular instances. And so they're using the moment in Noach where it says Noach, as opposed to here Yaakov, but it's the Midrash comes up because he's an example. So it says all those who enter the world, lest they think of saying he was only righteous in his generation, right? So in Noah's case, that he was only righteous in the generation that he lived in. The Holy One said, for me, he is the equal of Abraham. Rav Yehuda bar Shalom, I don't know who that is, said the name is stated two times, right? The reason that it says his name in, I don't know what these are called, and no one's going to be able to see me, so great. The reason that this is, did someone just chat it to me? He's a Levite. Yes, very good. You are so helpful. That when the person's name is stated two times, that it gives equality to the people who are righteous. So I think what they're saying here, this is a little bit of a wordy way of saying that their names are said twice because their names deserve to be kind of highlighted and put up on a pedestal with those who were also righteous. So it's Noah and Abraham and Shmuel and Jacob, and these are all people that when called, their names are used twice so that we're seeing them as righteous beings. Okay, so now, does anybody have any comments on that piece before I get to the dream night piece?
I went to unmute myself and I muted you. That was an accident, I promise.
What?
I don't understand. Can you give this to me again? Like what about saying it twice gives them equality? I don't quite get that.
It's basically to say, well, first of all, I'm interested in hearing what the Piazetzner Rabbi says, but it's basically saying that the two names being stated, unlike when we say like Yitzchak's name, right? That the two names being stated here are making these characters into categories of righteous people, which is why their names are then said twice. I forget who said it, but I came across a commentary that also says that the reason that they are righteous is because they live both in this world and in the next world. And so in saying their name, the name is being used in this world and in the world to come. And so their righteousness is kind of held up above those whose names are only used once. You don't like it. You don't like it.
It's not that I don't like it. I don't quite understand how it like elucidates it. Meaning, to me, it just makes more sense that it's like an attention getter, right? To make sure that the person is paying attention.
Well,
right?
I think that they're saying that it's not for Jacob to pay attention. It's for us to pay attention that Jacob was a righteous person. So Jacob heard his name. It's hard for me to not tell the people not seeing your face that you're making faces. But Alex, what was the Piazetzner's piece on this?
Sure. He said something really interesting about the difference between the doubling up of names with Moses and from the rest of these characters that, and this might be the way that we have punctuated, but with Moses, there isn't a break in between Moshe. And with a lot of these other doubling up of names, it's Abraham. There's a pause there. And he says that the reason is because God carries a lot of the burden of the people suffering, and that in that moment where God is calling out to Moses, there is like a tremendous amount of suffering that God is suffering under. And so, saying like, Moses, like calling out to in like a moment of desperation, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is how I would have read it. Like in terms of when you think of calling someone's name, right? Either they can't hear you, or you're trying to get their attention so much so that you say their name multiple times. And it's a beautiful way of reading it. I like the burden piece that's put in there. It's a beautiful way of reading it, and one that I think is closer to how we might read it without other commentaries. And Rabbi Shapiro is still making faces, so maybe
No, I'm not just. It makes me think about going back the other way, and I was thinking about this as a doubling too, and it depends again also where you punctuate it, because there's no punctuation. But I think about the 13 attributes.
Yeah.
Right. Vayomer Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, right? You can read it as God said, here's what you say, right? Vayomer Adonai, right? Mm-hmm. But you can also read it as, and that's what Moshe said. And Moshe said, Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun. So particularly with an eye towards like burden, right? The burden of that moment and asking for help. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about that. I mean, I just think about it very practically, like when Jonah's jumping on the couch and they say, Jonah, right? Like that's what it makes me think of. Like, no, you really got to pay attention right now. This is a purely fictional example. It doesn't happen every hour on the hour. But it makes me think about, right, just in the raw paying attention of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting. And the difference between when they're like smushed together, like one after the other, instead of like when there's a pause and then going into the next one.
Yeah.
Right. Can I share my theory of Hineni? Can I articulate my theory of Hinenis?
Yeah, and then I'll do the night piece. Yeah.
You're excited about the night. I don't want to take the night piece away from you.
No, it's fine. I'm just telling you.
Okay. So for those of our guests who don't know, I love playing with concordances. Concordances.
Rabbi Kligfeld and I don't know if you know this actually, Rabbi Shapiro. Rabbi Kligfeld and I gave an entire teaching last Shabbat using what we found in a concordance to make our drush. We didn't give you any credit, but here is me giving you credit.
I mean, because I also like affordable housing, and I don't expect credit every time, people get a roof over their head. So, that's a weird tangent. Okay. I went back and I looked. So Hineni is not a common word phrase in Tanakh. From what I saw, it only shows up 16 times. But in addition to this, it shows up 5 times in the whole arc of like the Yaakov narrative, right? So that's really interesting. It's interesting that almost a third of the time it shows up in all of Tanakh happened over the past couple of prakim. Like I just think like stam, that's interesting, but that also seems to be calling and saying like, okay, well, what's going on there that it would show up so frequently? And here are the places that it shows up before this one. One is it shows up, the first time it shows up is when Yitzchak calls to Esav to go and hunt for him, right? So the first Hineni in the Yaakov story is actually from Esav. So that's like just interesting period, I think. The next time it shows up is, of course, when Yaakov is pretending to be Esav. So the first time Yaakov says Hineni is when he's pretending to be his brother. That's also really interesting. Then the third time it shows up is when Yaakov is living with Lavan, and he's the whole goat situation, the speckled goats and the non-speckled goats and that whole scam. But he says Hineni when he's relaying to Leah and Rachel the dream he had where he shares with them about why it's okay for him to get the goats, which seems to be a little sketchy at best, right? Is that a real Hineni in responding to God, or is that Yaakov being like, I don't know, people say Hineni when they want it to sound authentic, and that's kind of how it reads to me. The next time it shows up in the story is when Yaakov calls to Yosef, and Yosef says to Yaakov, Hineni, and now this one. Right, so those were the 4 previous Hinenis, and now we get to this one, like right as we're approaching this like climactic moment in the narrative.
Wait, so is this the first time? Sorry that I didn't follow all that like numerically, but is this the first time that Jacob is saying it to God? Wow,
I think so. Because unless you. At best, in the story that he's saying to Leah and Rachel, you're hearing it secondhand, right? That he said it to God in a dream, but you're not getting like in media res, right? You're not getting like in the moment of the narrative where it's happening.
Yeah.
And I think he's just sort of like telling them, oh, I had this dream where God told me to do this to these goats. Like, I don't think that really happened. But so in addition to it being like interesting, Stam, that this seems to be the first place where Yaakov is actually, and the one and only place where Yaakov says Hineni to God. If you look at each of those moments, right, those are each moments that either themselves are moments of brokenness or lead to moments of brokenness, right? That it kicks off the Jacob and Esau story, and then it's Jacob pretending to be Esau. And it's this still sort of like weird moment of fracture between Jacob and Lavan. And then it's this moment at the beginning of the Joseph narrative where Joseph ends up doing his whole deal, right? So here we finally get to we're coming to the end of the Yaakov narrative, and it's like, it's that last, right? Maybe this is the restorative Hineni, right? It's just interest, like that it's 90% of a thought. Like I don't have a big therefore on it from there, but it's just interesting to me to like track those
and is the
5 Hinenis over the course of the narrative.
And is the next Hineni Moshe?
Ding.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great drash. Do you want to give a sermon this Shabbos?
You can just record that. Just take that part out. Don't put the podcast up, and just play the audio.
Use it for Shabbos.
No, that wasn't a drash. That was just that part. You should give me credit for because I actually did my homework on that. But take it. I mean, I think you could take that any number of different directions, right? Like, what does it mean to finally respond to a call? What does it mean to finally respond to a call as yourself in the moment instead of being someone else, right? Like, how are the ways in which you can say the same thing multiple times in your life and it finally means something different when you're ready to change, right? Like, there's all sorts of directions you could take that, I think. This
is a tangent, but in looking at the word Hineni, I remember when we were doing all that pre-Elul or pre-Tishrei during Elul stuff, that our first theme, because every week had a theme, our first theme was Ayeka. And I remember Rabbi Mark Borovitz bringing up the use of Ayeka to Hineni, right? That where are you? Here I am. And how it's used in that way versus the Moshe way or even the Yaakov way, right? Of just calling out a name and being able to say, here I am, versus where are you? And then saying, here I am. Like, how are those Hinenis the same? How are they different? What are the responses to?
Right, because he's a very different person at each stage of that narrative.
Yeah. They're saying Mark Moore was a very different person. Yeah, no, he right. It's a very different... Yeah, it's a very different... Like it. I like it a lot.
Ben unmuted. Ben, were you going to say something? You unmuted.
Well, yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying in terms of it being finally responding as himself in the moment, that's also happening in the same pasuk where we have 2 different names for him. which just to me makes it all the more interesting. He's responding to Yaakov, even though he is now known as Yisrael.
There you go. Ding, there's the drash. Boom. See, Ben found it. I knew there was a drash in there somewhere. Yeah, Ben, say more about that. That's great.
Well, he's responding, sort of building off of what Rabbi Schatz brought in. This is the name that he's really been conversant with God with. It's been Yaakov. And so for all this greatness that he's become, for all of this, the future that he will be known by, at the end of the day, the personal relationship is in that original name, in how he starts his relationship with God. And so I think that's really where the Hineni comes in, it's sort of him recentering himself. And I don't want to say like stripping away the ego of Yisrael, but stripping away the grandeur and just realizing it's just him. It's Yitzchak's son, as we had in the verse prior. It's not Yisrael, the man who fights with angels, mystical beings, whatever. It's the person who set some stones on the ground and God spoke to him.
Yeah, love that.
That's so good. Yeah. Sorry. No. Go ahead, Rabbi Shapiro.
Thank you, Rabbi Schatz. I was going to or integration, right? That he's bringing those two pieces together. That when he finally says that Hineni, he's responding as both, right? That he's been sort of a wrestler his whole life, and he's been moving from one to the other, and he can finally say, like, am I Yisrael? Am I Yaakov? Yes, Hineni. Right.
And also that this actually is part of what Rabbi Klinkfeld and I spoke about this past Shabbos, but to bring all the pieces of this conversation together, you also can be two different names to people, right? Like I am Rebecca, and I'm also Rabbi Schatz, and I'm also other nicknames to family and friends. And I think that is, you could say the same response and mean it in different ways. Even if you're saying it with those different, proverbial hats on, you could be saying the same thing, the same word, the same response, and mean it in different ways through those different lenses. So even if he's saying it as Yaakov or saying it as Yisrael, having both of those names there for him to say Hineni maybe is that kind of, yes, I could say it differently based on these two pieces, but I can also bring myself together to say it in this way.
Yeah. For sure.
And Batman, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, Josh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Another theory on Hineni, but before just the chat that Rabbi Shapiro said, you read out loud, and Batman, think about it. Have you ever seen Rebecca Schatz and Batman in the same place? I haven't. So I just didn't want that to go unacknowledged.
You guys are ruining all the fun of people not being able to see my face or read the chat. I am trying to enjoy being able to go undercover, and my colleagues are foiling.
I didn't know podcast etiquette. This is my first time on the show.
You're doing great. You're getting an A+ thus far.
F minus.
Well, I was wondering, because I don't even want to complicate the Hineni theories, because I already love where we went with it. But just other ways to look at it, I was thinking, because you mentioned Beersheba, and we were saying, I thought that was an Abraham thing. Is that a Yaakov thing, or is that a Yitzchak thing? Well, they all kind of have a claim to it. So I like similarly with Hineni. It's like, no. Hineni is an Abraham thing. Well, actually, it's really a Yaakov, it's a Yitzchak thing in the Akedah. Well, maybe here it's also a Yaakov thing. So I like this sharing the wealth or inheriting it or stepping into your legacy, whatever you want to go with it. But the other thing is, if we do make this Akedah link, then maybe there's a parallel in the import of the moment here that, in a way, this is the new Akedah coming up, that you're about to go down to Egypt. It's going to be a sacrifice. It's going to be 400 years. But just like the first Akedah ended not the way you expected, it ended okay. Again, things are going to be okay this time too.
Great.
There's another piece to fast forward a little bit. There's a couple of comments that pick up on the fact Rabbi Bachya talks about it a little bit. And I saw it one or two other places. I was sort of foreshadowing it when I was doing that translation in terms of the Anochi Ered, right? You could just say Ered. You don't need to say, you don't say, I will go, right? No, I will go. That would be sufficient. And that the Anochi is foreshadowing of Sinai. Because of course, right, that's the first word of the Maseret HaDibrot. That's the first word of the Revelation. So when you can see Anochi, and it's like lingering there. I'm going to take you down to Egypt, but you'll have that on the other side, right? So it's going to be bad, but there will be. Now, there's all sorts of theological issues in terms of, okay, it's going to be bad in the short term, but in the end, it's going to be great. That theology is tricky. But in terms of looking at the language and in terms of that's how it functions within the text of the Torah, right? That's how God works within the narrative. And giving that Anochi as sort of a way of saying that's going to be waiting on the other side for you. And to me, in terms of like, yes, you can read it as poetic language, but you can also just sort of see that word for its major resonance in terms of the larger narrative of the Torah. Yeah, Alex.
There's also, I don't know, there's also something that seems like a reversal of the Akedah here, because he's going down to Egypt to see his son who he thought was lost to him.
You make a good pair. Mm-hmm. You make a good pair. Yeah. I think you're picking up on something that shows kind of that mirror effect that we see so much throughout the Torah, that we can have that same profound moment in one way and also in the reverse, that there is this profound loss, but then there is also this profound finding, and that you have something to do with both, right? He could have sacrificed his son, or he could have chosen, excuse me, not to go after the opportunity to bring his family back together. So, I've always, so in Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Cohen's class, he asks you to do a final project. I forget which class this was that I took with him, but a final project. And I did a project on mirrors, and how the Talmud acts as a mirror of our life. And so when picking different sugiyot, how we can read them as a mirror into our life. And I often think of that when the two of you bring up things like this, where one person can see it this way and the other person can see the exact same thing the opposite way, because we can imagine those moments being not only mirrors of one another, but also mirrors of our own understanding of what those experiences meant. And that's why Torah is so awesome, that we can see those things happen and also interpret them throughout our own lens. And
that word mar'eh, in terms of mar'eh Laila, you can see it as vision, or you can also see it as mirror. I love that idea. I'm just, in addition to singing Justin Timberlake to myself, thinking about, I love the inverted Akedah, right? Like the echoing and then the inversion, right? The idea that Abraham thought he was going to have to sacrifice his son, but then didn't, on the heels of a Hineni, and now on the heels of a Hineni, Yaakov is going down to see the son who he thought was lost, but now it turns out is going to be found. Yeah, it's really fantastic. Okay, so I want to bring a few other pieces. Rabbi Schatz has been waiting to do her dream piece for. I have, but I also want to bring one other piece about this, what we're talking about right now, because I think it's, though I like another piece, I think this is also a very fascinating moment. So I read this Datz Kainim. Those of you who have not studied the Datz Kainim commentary on the Torah, you can't just make faces. I haven't studied the Datz Kainim. I don't know what it. I was including everybody in this. If you have not studied the Datz Kainim with Torah commentary, it is fascinating. There's not always commentary on everything, like there is Rashi for everything, but I often appreciate the commentaries that are used. And in this case, I really, really like this idea. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but basically what it's saying about this moment of I will go down with you, right? So it says,
God, will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also go back up with you. The wording, when examined closely, implies that whereas God personally will accompany him on the way down to Egypt, an agent of God's will supervise the return to the land of Canaan of his body when the time came. And then it goes through this math that it says 70 of his descendants have been mentioned as coming to Egypt. Only 69 names are listed. And then when it says 600,000 later, it's actually one less than 600,000 because they're adding God. The Torah is adding God as one of those numbers, which is just, I mean, I haven't counted all 600,000. I know that's hard. That number's hard for me to say. To see if this is true, but even if it's not true, just the idea that this is how math was thought of when constructing these words of Torah are just, it blows my mind. I love that. And then this piece here kind of speaks to this drash that Josh and Alex are working on, that this idea of using the word Mitzrayim, that it actually, yes, God is talking to Jacob in this moment, but that what God is saying here is that God will always be with you in your times of Mitzrayim, in your times of narrow, confined spaces, which is what the root is for Mitzrayim. Right, just like Min HaMeitzar, that God will always be with the Jewish people when they find themselves in these moments. So it's not just to Jacob the character, but to Yisrael, to the people of Jacob, which again I really, really loved. Okay, here's the piece of the dreams, and then okay. I'm just going to read this. It's from the Guide for the Perplexed. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read pieces of it.
Good. A quick piece of Guide for the Perplexed that I'm sure we'll be able to get through pretty quickly without being very confused. Yes.
I'm not reading the whole thing, and it's not confusing. There are 4 different ways in which Scripture relates the fact that a divine communication was made to a prophet. Number 1, the prophet relates that he heard the words of an angel in a dream or in a vision. Number 2, he reports the words of the angel without mentioning that they were perceived in a dream or a vision, assuming that it's well known that the prophecy can only originate in one of the 2 ways. And there's a quote. Number 3, the prophet does not mention the angel at all, right? He says that God spoke to him, but he states that he received the message in a dream or a vision. Number 4, he introduces his prophecy by stating that God spoke to him or told him to do a certain thing or speak certain words, but does not explain that he received the message in a dream or a vision. Because, again, he assumes that it's well known. Okay, so 4 different ways. Rabbi Shapiro is not understanding this. I'm going to keep...
No, I understand it, but I don't understand where you're going with it.
Okay, well, I'm not. Rambam is. So then he gives a bunch of different examples for where this first form of prophecy comes up. Okay? And then this part in red is the only part we're going to read. We're not going to read all these pieces. Every passage in Torah introduced by any of these 4 forms is a prophecy proclaimed by a prophet. But the phrase, "and Elohim came to a certain person in the dream of night," does not indicate a prophecy. And the person mentioned in that phrase is not a prophet. Everybody with me so far? If you're on the podcast and not with me, I'm sorry. The phrase only informs us that the attention of the person was called by God to a certain thing, and at the same time that this happened at night. For just as God may cause a person to move in order to save or to kill another person, so God may cause, according to God's will, certain things to rise in man's mind in a dream by night. So now it's getting into the dream piece, but it's explaining to us that this is one way in which we find that God actually comes to people in our Tanakh. I mean, it has so many different examples and quotes here from different places in which this exact formula, so to speak, though not the exact same words, are used to understand that God is coming to a character to somehow give a message, And yet that person is not a prophet, right? Jacob is not a prophet. Jacob is just having a moment of connection with God, and that God is bringing to light, to the surface, something that God wants this character in our piece here, Jacob, to then kind of live out or go forward with. So that's the major piece that I wanted to bring. So I think it's really, and I'm happy to send it for those people who are actually interested in reading through all the sources. I think it's really interesting to see how those different characters are in communication with God, and how Jacob very prominently has these communications with God at night, which according to Rambam is something that is part of a formula of when these types of relationship moments, I guess, are occurring with our characters. Rabbi Shapiro, do you have thoughts about that? Rabbi Shapiro did this to me last week, where he read this very involved piece, and then he was like, Rabbi Schatz, do you want to tell us something? So the tables have turned.
Oh, Rabbi Schatz has been waiting to get her rabbinic revenge on me for
no
all week. No, it's fine. I mean,
you don't like.
Yes, it's fine. I don't necessarily need the taxonomy of Revelation, but it's interesting to see it mapped out. I do think it's interesting to see the multiple times where this happens for Yaakov at night, right? Not surprisingly, a lot of the commentators pick up on, it's the night because he's leaving the land and he's going into Galus. And so, of course, that could only happen at night. I do think, I do wonder about,
but it's night in three different ways, right? I didn't bring these pieces, but it's night in three different ways. One is a dream. One is a wrestling at night, but not necessarily asleep. We all say that it's a dream, but it doesn't actually say that. It just says that there was a wrestling all night long.
Right.
Now this is happening, and it doesn't say a dream, but it says in the vision of night, which could be, he knocked himself. I mean, it could be anything.
Do you know? I mean, it'd be interesting. Does the Shady Hineni I mentioned, that would be a great name for a Jewish sort of experimental jazz fusion group, the Shady Hinenis. Do you know if he mentions that Hineni that I thought was like a little, the one with the goats and the whatnot? Like, does Maimonides see that as
I didn't look.
That'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see if he calls that a something.
Yeah, I didn't look for the goat Hineni, but it's possible. I'm glad you enjoyed that. The truth is, I mean, that's why I was so excited that Alex brought it up, because I thought I was going a little bit nuts that I couldn't find any commentators who cared as much about this moment of Jacob at night. The other ones we have so much commentary on, right? The wrestling, obviously, because his name has changed, and then the dream with the ladder or the sulam, whatever you want to call it, that we have a lot on that, but we don't have a lot on this. The rabbis seem to not care as much that this is something that happens at night. They like the name piece. They like the Hineni piece. I realize that it's 5 minutes after the hour, and though we started late, I don't want to keep our rabbinical students for too long. I have a Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs piece to end on, but I want to give you any final words that you might have.
I'll just say thank you. This was really fun, a real joy to be on here. Love learning with you all, and I'm very honored that he made me that I was here today. So thank you.
Oh,
and that's
good sign off from Josh.
Josh Jacobs.
Josh Jacobs laying a high bar for the quality sign off.
Rabbi Shapiro, any thoughts before Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs us? Okay, I'm going to read it.
I had a piece that if there was a piece I really like, can we like put it in the podcast? Like, can I put in like the podcast notes or something? I found a very groovy piece, but I don't want to take the sax
right now.
I don't want to. You're just going to sax trump me with your with your Zach?
No, I'm going to do it at the end. But if you have something to share, then share it. Our rabbinical students can go whenever they would like or need to go. But
class is dismissed. No, it was just it was a very cool piece that I could say a lot more about, but just very briefly, the Ramah pointed out in verse 4, which we didn't get into all that much at all, because of how it reads that, like, God says, I will go down with you and I will lift you back up. Like, put very, very briefly, he says that when there are two people, right, when there are two parties who have to go down into a hole, and he uses the language in Hebrew of a bore, which I don't think is an accident because that's what Yosef was put in, right? That the person who has courage should go down first, and then the person who is scared should come after him. And then the person who is more scared should get lifted out first, and then the person who is braver goes up after him. And so applying that to the context, and if you look closely at the verse, you see that it works with the verbs, that God is volunteering to go down first and to bring Jacob along with him, and God will then sort of guide Jacob back up and then come out afterwards. And I just thought, in terms of, extrapolating any kind of relationship, but also particularly a relationship with God, that sort of God will go down before you and then also elevate you back up. I just thought that was a lovely paradigm for thinking about relationship. I just thought it was a really nice little explication.
That is really nice. Thank you for adding that.
You're most welcome.
I'm glad we got to learn that today. Okay, so here's the final piece. Rabbi Shapiro is in rare form today, folks. Okay. All right. So this is part of a larger drash that Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs does on the moment where Jacob says, I was in this place and I did not know, right, that God was in it, that it was holy, all those things. And he brings about all these different moments of Jacob at night to prayer. And something that I've shared with our community a lot during this pandemic is that prayer is often a very hard thing for me in isolation. It's a very easy thing for me in community, and I love being in community when davening, but it's a very hard thing for me to wake up and want to daven. And so I really appreciated this piece in thinking about what prayer can be in regard to Jacob's moments in darkness. Jacob's prayer is very different. He does not initiate it. His thoughts are elsewhere, on Esav, from whom he is escaping, and on Lavan, to whom he is traveling. Into this troubled mind comes a vision of God and the angels and a stairway connecting earth and heaven. He has done nothing to prepare for it. It is unexpected. Jacob literally encounters God as we can sometimes encounter a familiar face among a crowd of strangers. This is a meeting brought about by God, not man. That is why Jacob's prayer could not be made the basis of a regular obligation. They're talking about Mariv. None of us knows when the presence of God will suddenly intrude into our lives. There is an element of the religious life that is beyond conscious control. It comes out of nowhere when we are least expecting it. If Abraham represents our journey towards God and Isaac our dialogue with God, Jacob signifies God's encounter with us. Unplanned, unscheduled, unexpected. The vision, the voice, the call we can never know in advance, but which leaves us transformed. As for Jacob, so for us, it feels as if we are waking from a sleep and realizing as if for the first time that God was in this place and I did not know. The place has not changed, but we have. Such an experience can never be made the subject of an obligation. It is not something we do. It is something that happens to us. Such experiences take place, literally or metaphorically, at night. They happen when we are alone, afraid, vulnerable, close to despair. It is then that when we least expect it, we can find our lives flooded by the radiance of the divine. Suddenly, with a certainty that is unmistakable, we know that we are not alone, that God is there and has been all along, but that we were too preoccupied by our own concerns to notice God. That is how Jacob found God, not by his own efforts like Abraham, not through continuous dialogue like Isaac, but in the midst of fear and isolation. Jacob in flight trips and falls, and finds he has fallen into the waiting arms of God. No one who has had this experience ever forgets it. That was Jacob's prayer. There are times when we speak and times when we are spoken to. Prayer is not always predictable, a matter of fixed times and daily obligation. It is also an openness and a vulnerability. God can take us by surprise, waking us from our sleep, catching us as we fall. So I just wanted to share that I thought it was a very profound piece on prayer, but also I love that our conversation kind of dove very deeply into the Hineni piece, and this feels like a beautiful response also to Hineni, and how we say Hineni in different moments and what we show up to do, and sometimes that those things that we show up for are the things that we were once scared of or noticed in the dark and then came out to be profound moments in our lives. So unless Rabbi Shapiro has another closing, I just wanted to gift that piece to all of you. It was something I'm going to hold on to as a profound piece of Torah. And hope you all have a great week. And you'll be hearing this on Friday. So Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Josh. Enjoy your Chinese food, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. I will be watching Soul and Wonder Woman 1984 this coming weekend, and I'm very excited about both of those things. Is that a good way to end?
Yeah, that was perfect.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.